Hello everyone, my name is Stephen Smith of EDU 331 and I am doing my presentation on my action research project, Reversing Adversive Virtual Communications, cutely called iChat with Class. Now I had chosen the issue of virtual communications because it is an issue that is going to be prevalent from here on out in public education. Beforehand, digital technology and education wouldn't have been thought of much. But thanks to COVID-19, virtual learning is going to become the new norm, even when the pandemic is over, hopefully sooner rather than later. But there are still issues and considerations that have to be made with virtual communication between teachers, students, and parents. Otherwise, it's not going to be an efficient way for students to reach their full potential and learn what they need to know academically. Now, when it came to the review of related literature, I focused mostly on online articles that had direct connections to virtual communications. There wasn't a lot of physical books in the library that dealt on the matter, but I found that these online articles were fairly sufficient to kind of express what I believe to be a problem that is very important and relevant to today. These sources included, but were certainly not limited to, Barriers to Communication in Distance Education by Zane Burge, The Pros and Cons of Online Learning by the University of North Carolina State, the University of Hawaii Press's take on virtual space and MOVEs, that's MUVEs, or multi-user virtual environments. And I even had the liberty of talking to two of my five teachers that I did field experience with this year as sources. One of them an 8th grade teacher at Elkton School, and the other a 9th grade history teacher at Giles County High. Now, what most of the sources that I had came to conclusion-wise was that they were pretty split down the middle about how virtual communications have been both beneficial for education as well as a hindrance. For the positives of virtual communication, articles like the NC State and Edutopia talked about how virtual communications allow for students to say what they wanted to say more clearly, have the time and the pace to work on assignments at their own leisure, or communicate with the teacher without having to feel any pressure. And that virtual communications could be useful in multiculturalism in the sense that it broke down barriers of race, gender, disadvantages, socioeconomic status, physical appearance, things that would be that some students would feel would be a hindrance to their ability to communicate their thoughts and opinions in a class. On the other side of that coin, though, the articles and my teacher sources all mentioned that there were concerns about virtual communications. And that was basically would be broken down into student concerns and technical concerns. When it came to technical concerns, it would be about the same as you would expect with any piece of computer or digital technology. If students are unable to have access to good Wi-Fi, if they are unable to keep their digital technology up to date and taken care of properly, or if they lack the ability to afford even the most basic of programs for these virtual classes as a result of their socioeconomic statuses, it's going to be a hindrance for students to communicate with their teachers if they're going to be learning in a virtual environment. The other aspect about issues with virtual communications was student concerns. And this dealt with evidence showing that despite insistence from the students themselves, as I have had in my own experience as a substitute teacher, students do learn better in a physical environment where they're able to engage with the teacher and their peers on a physical level. It's a kind of the human level of learning. For instance, in one source, EdSource, they did interviews with California students directly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic earlier this year, and the majority of them came to the consensus that virtual learning made them less motivated and less organized when it came to their schoolwork. They missed having that interaction with their teacher and with their peers, and they realized that such interactions are actually key to retaining knowledge and being more involved in the learning process. And other student concerns and issues involved matters of people think that this generation of students are computer whizzes. They know exactly what they want, what they have to do when it comes to virtual communications. Well, that can be considered a stereotype that is harmful to students, because the honest reality of it is not every student has both the technical skills and the qualities like self-motivation, self-organization, and time management that is necessary for virtual learning. Now, when it came to my experiment, I had first given out a pre-assessment survey to a group of volunteers from the ninth that agreed to be a part of this experiment. This is from the 9th grade history teacher that I mentioned earlier. And within this pre-assessment survey, I wanted to get kind of a feel of what these students thought about virtual communications with their teacher as well as other teachers. The questions were simple and straightforward, and they went along the lines of, did they have any technical problems that they thought they could handle? Or were there any that they thought were beyond their control? Did they have the skills that they believed that were necessary in their minds to have virtual learning, including technical skills? What did they think was the biggest problem with virtual communications in learning? And out of 20 students in a virtual class, and these are students that do complete virtual learning because of the pandemic, only 6 responded. I wish I could have had more, but I had to work with what I had because there were legality reasons in terms of getting more students to be involved without being associated with the grading procedures of the school and so forth. After the survey was returned to me, the ones that finished it, I gave out a letter saying basically that as part of the next step of this experiment, which I had mentioned to them, I wanted to find times during the day in which the volunteers and I could have open discussions via GroupMe, Microsoft Teams, or texting. And basically, the purpose of this was, for the experiment, to have an open dialogue about virtual communications for approximately 14 school days, maybe a weekend. And I had ultimately hoped that by creating a dialogue with these volunteers that was built on trust and having conversations like, how was your day? Are you having trouble communicating your thoughts and opinions to the teacher? Is it due to personal concerns or technical concerns? Is there anything that I can do to help? Any advice that I can offer? Any advice that both the teacher and the peers could provide? I thought that this could help increase the level of communication the students would give to their history teacher. I wasn't expecting too much because, after all, these kinds of virtual communication problems are extensive and they are going to take all of society to fix. I thought that if even the slightest change in how often students talk to their teachers, which most of them said they only did when they had to communicate a specific question or needed help with an assignment, I thought that even the slightest change could be significant, and it would be progression in terms of people properly addressing virtual communications. The more people become aware and discuss it, the more the problem is able to be solvable by even the lowest levels of society. Unfortunately, after sending out that letter, none of the volunteers responded. And it brought concern to myself, it brought concern to the teacher who was helping me with the volunteers. And we did our best to wait after consulting with an outside party to give the volunteers more time to get back with me on times that would work best for them to communicate and have these meetings with me. But after waiting about 5 days, there was just not enough time to do a conclusive experiment that showed improvement in virtual communications over a significant length of time. So unfortunately, I had to cancel the experiment. Now, while some people might think that this is bad, I find that in this situation, sometimes the lack of evidence, or in my case, the lack of an experiment itself, can be useful in proving a point. And in this case, it showed that it wasn't so much the technical issues that were bothering the students and preventing the teacher from effectively communicating with his virtual students. It was the fact that these students were not putting in the effort to make the time to communicate virtually with myself and the teacher. And this is something that you'll probably see a lot of if you are observing a physical class. If you're in a physical class, the teacher is more easily able to get students to put in the effort to do the work, to express their ideas to the teacher or to others. In virtual learning, it's not so much the case. In fact, it's kind of going back to the point that articles like NC State made. The students have to have that kind of self-motivation, self-organization, and time management that is needed to put in the effort to communicate virtually with the teacher and their peers. And this is something that parents might have to get involved in because, as I stated before, not every student has those qualities that are necessary to virtually communicate. And I feel like this is an important little discovery as a result of this lack of an experiment, because without the effort on the student's part to at least attempt to virtually communicate with their teacher, it can hinder the entire education process. It can even make issues that are related to technical matters more problematic, because if the students don't put in the effort to tell others, such as my Chromebook has a battery problem, I don't have good Wi-Fi access, if they don't put in that effort to express these concerns, then it's going to hurt them, it's going to hurt their education, it's going to hurt the teacher, it's going to stop the domino process that I like to think of when I can think about education. So ultimately, while the Action Research Project didn't go exactly as planned, I think it made a good point in showing how, when it comes to reversing adversive virtual communications, one of the biggest steps that is going to be having to occur is that students have to put in the effort, and that may mean that the teachers and parents are going to have to help get the student to make that attempt in effort with virtual communications. It's not going to be an easy process. It's not going to be it's not going to be something that every student is going to take to kindly, just like it would be in other classes, physical-wise, I mean. But ultimately, with more discussions like this and more research like I did, these kinds of problems are going to be addressed, and everything will eventually smooth itself out enough to where virtual communications in learning will be efficient enough to be utilized by the masses as the next wave of educating young minds and helping them reach their full potential. I hope that you guys enjoyed my presentation. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. And I hope that this this project helps encourage you as prospective teachers to think about how virtual learning and virtual communications are going to be part of your classroom management and your teaching style. Thank you, and I hope all of you have a very good day.